We are going to item 10.
Yeah.
C40 activity update and revised leadership standards. Alec, back again, and Jacques.
Kia ora everybody. Thanks for coming back from lunch. It's always good. It's a hard show to follow, Dr. Rodcar. I will do my best. So we're going to talk about the C40 network that we're part of. I will take the paper as read. I just wanted to flag a few slides, just pull out a couple of really key points. Obviously, as you will see in the paper, we've been a member of C40 since about 2015. Some of you will remember that we reapplied to be a member in 2018, so every 3 years as an innovator city we need to do that. Over the past year or so, we as an organisation have engaged in a range of networks, so things from food through to air quality, sustainable finance, land use planning, and benefited from peer-to-peer knowledge exchange. So kind of to Councillor Walker's point from earlier, we try and find the right person within the right department, so healthy water, looking at flooding, and so on. And so we've engaged in a whole range of things and benefit from that exchange, but also, to the Mayor's point, actually as a vehicle to profiling the work that we have done, which is great. The big thing that we've done, obviously, over the last year is the technical review and approval of Te Tariki Tawhiri, Auckland's climate plan, which has gone through their analysis, and they've done the checks and balances to make sure it aligns with our 1.5 degree commitment, which it does. One place that they said it would be great to do a little bit more work is on the development of adaptation goals and targets, which actually, as a topic, is really hard for cities all around the world. So again, it's a challenge to us, but it's a great challenge to have because it will help us lead the way. Other things that we've been involved with, the third bullet down, is an opportunity to be involved in some pretty high-profile multi-sector initiatives. And this talks to our plan that we actually need a whole range of people across the region to deliver on our climate goals, and thinking about things like equity through the Global Green New Deal. Something that's on at the moment, if you're not aware, excuse me, is the Students Reinventing Cities competition, where we've nominated Northcote Town Centre as an area where students, not just New Zealand students, but students from around the world, can come up with ideas about how we could redesign, reinvent that part of Tāmaki Makaurau. So that is open now. Please share with your networks. The registrations are open until April 15th for actually people to take part, and you don't actually have to focus on Northcote. You could look at some of the other cities around the world and provide ideas there. Yeah, Henderson. Which actually was part of the initial Reinventing Cities program on the Falls car park. And then the final bullet I just wanted to highlight is we have had an opportunity to pilot some really emerging tools. So some of you will have heard about the Thriving Cities Initiative or the City Portrait tool that comes from Kate Raworth's Donor Economics initiative. And we've been working with C40 about how can we use those principles about a regenerative economy into what is our economic development action plan. So some really great opportunities that we've had over the last year and beyond, and are moving through over the coming years. Obviously, the key part of the decision that you have before you today is to look at these revised leadership standards. And I think just to make a point that there is a particular change here. So prior to this point, C40 has talked about participation standards, and it's been a very purposeful move to leadership standards, because fundamentally climate action is no longer just about a passive activity that we participate and sign up to stuff. It is about delivery, and it is about leadership. And that has been the focus of the standards revision. So just talking through really quickly these 5 standards that we as a C40 city will need to meet. The first one, obviously the plan. We have adopted that Resilient Inclusive Climate Action Plan aligned with 1.5 degrees. A little bit of work to be done on the adaptation side of things, but we have that plan set out. The second one, which is the critical one, which is about delivery. It's about saying, well, that's all great, but how are we showing that we're actually on track to delivering our commitments? There's a recognition in the leadership standards that says, we recognize that you as a city municipality has control over certain things, other parts, central government, business have control over the others, so we need to see you doing your part and recognize that there are others that need to come to the party as well. So that's the second one around delivery. The third one is, again, about our role. Our role as an organisation, mainstreaming climate into our decision-making using the financial, regulatory, all the other tools that we have at our disposal to address climate change. And again, as I note in the paper, there are things that we are trying to do within the organisation to enable that, to demonstrate that. And just the last two really point to that leadership side of things, innovating, trialling, testing those new approaches to addressing some of our key challenges. Thinking about that thriving cities approach, thinking about our consumption emissions. So it's all well and good, Dr. Carr made some great statements about our production emissions, but actually if we think about all the goods and services that we consume from different parts of the world, that adds to our emissions profile as well. So how well are we capturing that component of our profile or our climate impact? And then the final one, which is really important, is that leadership. Is about influencing others. It is about the mayor and the city. So there's often been a focus on the mayor's role. This is about the city as well, demonstrating climate leadership, bringing others with us. And so that's a really important part of what C40 want to see us doing as a part of that network, is looking at others and helping others through this climate action journey. And so that's all I had to say, and I'll field any questions that you might have.
Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Alex and Jacques. A couple of questions. Well, actually, no, one. In paragraph 18, you talk about that we're compliant with exceptions, and the 3 exceptions, about developing some more specific adaptation goals and targets, etc. Have we got the resources to do that? And can we do it by October 2021?
Yeah. That's a great question. We're having a couple of conversations with C40 as to the nature of the work that is required. As we alluded to, resources are strapped, as with other parts of council. However, what you will note in the 10-year budget proposal, there is some specific funding around adaptation measures and goals set forward. So we're hoping that, having had a discussion with C40, we can clarify exactly what's needed, and then that will help us do that.
The other quick question, Mr. Chair, is in terms, we talked earlier around legislation, etc., etc. Is the current legislation around this enabling of us to fulfil on these C40 goals, or is it doesn't matter? Is there anything that needs to change legislatively that would help us meet these goals?
So I guess if I take that question, it kind of goes back to the Climate Commission advice. So what we're going to provide in that submission is, look, this is our climate plan. This is what we've adopted. The settings that are being proposed, even by the Climate Commission, may or may not help us meet that, the second one, the delivery side. So that's what some of the submission will be.
Thank you.
Councillor Collins.
Thanks, Chair. I just had a question around the deliver part, and I'm referring to the box. I don't know if I missed something in the key, Alex, but I couldn't quite work out what yellow was and what green was, so my apologies if I missed something in the reading.
No, you're very right, actually. I didn't put a key in at all. Apologies. I've just realised that I didn't do that. So green is effectively we're doing that. We're effectively either delivered or done. Yellow requires more work. Sorry, I do realise I didn't.
No, that's fine, because that will help me understand the question. Well, I might not need to ask my question, but I'll ask it anyway. I'm interested in the equitable outcomes part of deliver, and when in the green bit, I thought it was really good, but I don't know there was anything that I could really pull out and hold on to that helped me understand equitable outcomes, unless we're just referring to our own climate action plan and how we link it all up so that it meets the requirements of that leadership standard part 2.
I think with a number of these topics, equity being one, I think you'd be a fool to say we've solved it, and that there is always work that needs to happen that we can make. And this is a great discussion I remember through to Tārakita for the actual plan, is kind of saying, well, all these interventions, they have different components. They have equity issues. We've talked about electric vehicles a lot, having equity issues. And the issue is not necessarily throwing out that solution because of those equity issues, is trying to figure out how we manage those equity issues. And so I think the principles are there through the plan, but also in adopting the Global Green New Deal, which is about equity, fairness in our climate response. So that's why it's kind of yellow. It's not red. It's like we've recognised it, but there will always be stuff that we need to do in this.
Thank you, Councillor. No other questions? Oh, sorry, Member Wilcox.
So my question is, and it's a little bit of a running commentary, but the tika of once you've been given Te Taruki or Tāwhiri, and now that we have signed up for C40, we can't afford to fail, otherwise our rangatiratanga goes down the slot as tāmaki, which we're upholding. So I suppose what I'm looking for is where are the areas that we may be touch and go, and how are we going to reallocate resources to make it happen? Because failure is not an option now, because we're talking about the mana of our city, and I'd hate to be the mayor that's going to front up and say, oh, we've blown it. So yeah, that's all. Do you have a process for doing this?
Do I have a process? It's a great question and really well put, so thank you for that. We know the areas that we need to work in the most to deliver on the plan, so that second outcome there. You know, the plan is there, and just as a side point, C40 is not just a take. Like, we don't just take from C40. The conversations that I've had with C40 have been very strong on the, you know, where Te Taraki is in terms of integrating a Te Ao Māori lens, and the input that we've had from Mana Whenua is possibly one of the best that they've seen. Actually, very few have been able to do that or looked at that. And so the challenge that we have now is, how do we share that? How do we with Mana Whenua, when I say we, are obviously, you know, highlight the importance of that to the narrative and share that with other C40 cities and beyond. So that's one thing just to make note. In terms of the delivery part, you know, we know that the decisions that we're making on our long-term budget, our 10-year RLTP, are critical, and they will have a key part on delivering our commitments. So those are some of the things that we really need to make sure are right, but also we need to make sure that the general decisions about urban form, which we talked about, those planning side, you know, we need to really hit home on those things.
Good, thank you. Mayor Goff.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Alex. The colour coding I was going to comment on, because I couldn't find the key either, but I presume that if you had a key, it would have said green, yellow, red. Green, that we're in the process of doing. Yellow stretches us a bit, but we can do it. And red would have been if we can't do it. So I take the implication of there being no red square, that there is no absolute block to us being able to achieve the objectives that are set for us by C40, but it will stretch us a bit, but that's the whole purpose of belonging to C40, isn't it? The second thing, I just thought probably be useful, because most councillors won't have much sight of it, it's the our access to their expertise, and that comes mainly to your part of the organisation. Can you tell us a bit about the sort of support that they've been able to give, for example, as we put the climate action plan together?
Yeah, totally. I guess one of the big parts has been in that emissions reduction pathway, and so providing that technical scrutiny. So they have a measurement and planning technical working group, and so Matthew, who you know from earlier, has been engaged with them on specifically what does urban emissions look like. So providing that technical grunt is one particular area. We've been involved in like an urban flooding. Again, what are other cities, and I know there was a point raised earlier, other cities facing the same issues, what are they doing, and so on. And then the final one I'll just flag is the investment sustainable finance arena. So this is a topic that we've been pushing quite hard here in Tāmaki Makaurau, but actually other cities like the New Yorks and the Londons have been progressing that. And so there's actually some technical support of consultants that are made available to kind of flesh out what does it look like, what are the things that we need to do. And then obviously we'll talk about waste shortly. You know, we, and Parul, I think is here, led the C40 Waste to Resources Network, and brought a bunch of C40 cities here to share that knowledge and expertise around waste, and similarly around air quality has been another topic that we've had a lot of input from them on.
Councillor Dalton.
Thank you. Alex, just under point 33, and there's some other declarations that we could endorse. Do our policies align that would be meaningful if we did endorse those, or have we still got policy work to do around that?
Apologies. So what I've done is I've highlighted the couple that most closely align. So the Divest Invest, which I've talked about being quite strongly aligned with our sustainable finance program, the Clean Air Cities one being quite closely aligned. So those are the two that are really strong. Some of the other ones, like the net zero carbon buildings, it kind of falls outside of our influence because it doesn't just talk about municipal buildings, it's buildings generally. So that's what I've tried to do.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any more questions? Councillor Watson.
Yeah, thanks. Just one question on these leadership standards, and particularly as it goes to point 5 of the role of the mayor and the city demonstrates global climate leadership. And I think of that in the context of the comments made by Dr. Clark to there, which was more giving a more localised emphasis, particularly as it goes to mobility and reaching targets. Auckland's a huge, big place. It's, geographically probably wider or longer than just about most other cities in the world, even though population-wise it's not that dense. So I'm really curious to know what the role of the city outside the mayor could be. The mayor's got his hands full with all number of things, and I think of the councillors in this room that in themselves are responsible for big chunks, each of which are quite significantly different as it goes to climate change targets or possibilities. So I'm just wondering, in the C40 network, what ability there is to break that leadership in terms of the phrase and the city down to more manageable chunks that might have a more meaningful response for our local communities, rather than just chucking it at the feet of the mayor and say, away you go, you're the leader, pull it all together. Well, conceivably there are 20 other leaders around here that could be contributing in some more meaningful fashion that each one of us could perhaps pick up on what's happening elsewhere. That to me would seem to be a more collaborative and meaningful response given the specifics of Auckland compared to some of these other cities.
If I just make a comment, I would love for all 20, however many of you, to be climate advocates and champions, full stop, regardless of C40. And I think that's a really great challenge to take on. Auckland is somewhat different to other C40 cities insofar as some of these declarations, like the Mayor Garcetti in Los Angeles can say this is the way it is and this is the way it will be done. We have a process where we actually have to bring these decisions to all councillors. So I think that we have a case for thinking about this in a somewhat different way. How that works out, I guess that's a conversation with the Mayor and with C40 as well to kind of, assign responsibilities and all that kind of stuff.
Well, make the point, if it's going to be a meaningful response to actually reducing emissions in light of what the doctor said today in its very good presentations, we really need to start making some of those changes in how we approach it. Otherwise we just fall into the habit of just waiting for other people or institutions to show the lead, where actually we could be taking the lead in a number of ways that don't necessarily involve big costs either.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something for all of us and to work on this year as well, Alec, how we can turn it into action for us individually as well as a group. And yeah, good points, Councillor. Member Wilson.
My apologies to the chair that I was late, and I'm quite happy for you to steer me elsewhere if things have already been canvassed. First of all, I'd like to say I appreciate the responses that were given in my pre-meeting hui. That was really very helpful, and it's allowed me to hone in more. Not target, hone in, more on the aspects that I'd like to tease out. So it's more around the connectivity of C40 to Te Taurike, Tāwhiri, which is the response from C40 is the implementation of that. And in terms of those standards, I don't know how to match across. So I don't know if you can see, and it's individually what that looks like, other than to continue to refer to the Te Tauruki Tawhiri. So without having to read that through and have it right next door to me, to be able to understand in terms of the leadership standards what this means by implementation, can you guide me, I guess, to a means by which we can assess if in fact the implementation, which is what the reference through C40 is being completed? Where would we see the results of that? If that's a question I can move.
Yeah, if I just, I suppose this points to a question that Member Wilcox made in terms of C40 and how it incorporates broadly Indigenous perspectives in climate action. And the point I made earlier was actually it's kind of new ground for C40, so that's perhaps why you don't see it so overtly in the standards that are set out there. We have a role to help C40 understand it as well, and I kind of mentioned that it's not just a one-way, we take all this technical insight. Actually, there's an opportunity for us to present that back as well, and I think that's a really strong opportunity for us, the broadest sense of us, to help C40 better understand how you could do that within a climate action lens. So I guess my answer is the reason you can't see it there specifically in terms of is perhaps that it's not been one of C40's focus areas, but it is something that we can help them get to.
Could I just add to that? I think also your question about results, how would we know if we're meeting that or whatever, it's going to show as to whether we're implementing our plan, because this is all about implementing our plan. So if we don't, then we may not be achieving all of that. If we do, then we will. And of course, the central part of that is the Te Ao Māori, the Mātauranga Māori, all of that particularly special aspect it is for Auckland.
Excellent. Just one more delving into that. So the MIS, Māori Impact Statement, references it at a very high level and very generally. So bearing in mind what's been said, how do you ensure that the Māori Impact Statement is not repetitive in the nature that we aren't there yet? That's really what I'm trying to get to. How do we know what we know, specifically for C40, because we're talking about the recommendations which include leadership standards, but we can't see in terms of the Māori Impact Statement where that's going to land. So how do we do that?
Can I start with a view?
Yeah.
So for me, and I think it's a good point that you make. As we report, we'll report sometimes through C40, but most importantly, we'll report on our plan itself. So for me, I think the Māori Impact Statement needs to be clear about where we're at with those results in the plan. Are we making progress or not, or where the areas are for improvement? And similar, so we'll do that a lot more than we will for C40. But if we report back on C40 as well, I think if we tie it in to that reporting too, I think that will make it clearer. That's my view. But Shark and Alec, you might have another view.
No, I was going to say the same thing. I'm not sure it will be necessarily in one thing. To implement the plan, we will be doing lots of things and lots of decisions will be made by committees, and it is in those step by step as you make those decisions that you will need to look for those impacts and make sure that they're adequately addressed. In addition to the...
Thank you. So I'll just leave it with one last comment rather than one question. The reason why I'm honing in on those is because the recommendation's asking us as the IMSB to endorse the commitment to meeting the revised leadership standards, and yet we can't measure those because we haven't got to that point. Hence the crucial nature of how do you do what you do to give us confidence as IMSB that they deserve a commitment to meeting C40. So I guess that I started here to try and get here. Why should we do that if we can't even see or even hear what the commitment is to that and advisement around the leadership standards? So I don't know if that need be teased out any further. I would certainly not expect that the same commentary in an MIS will continue, and that additional work potentially with the IMSB around how to make that happen would be helpful, I guess.
Thanks, appreciate that, yep.
Thank you. Councillor Dalton.
Chair, thank you. Look, I just would like to endorse what Councillor Watson said about ambassadors. I'd like to see some sort of practical action out of that, whether that's a conversation with our CSAs or with the councillors who have the capacity in sort of every sense of the word to do that. Because I think if we're going to be able to talk about this with our communities, which is a gap, it's a big gap, then we need to be armed with the right information as well as the willingness to do so. And I think sharing that load as leaders in the city is pretty critical, actually. So, yep, I endorse what John said about that. If I can leave that with you to do
definitely.
something.
Thank you, Councillor Dalton. And I think it is a clear, probably we've got the plan now, we've promoted the plan. It's now up to all of us to sell it, ensure our communities understand it, and get the ideas from our community of how to bring it along, because all the ideas are not there yet for how do we achieve our goals. So I think it's a really good point that, whatever that looks like, it's going to look differently in each of our communities, but I think it's a no-brainer to get us in behind making the easy and hard kind of things we need to do as a city, but within communities. It will get the change of what Councillor Bartley was asking before of the Climate Change Commission too, like how do we convince people that it's the right thing to do, and how do we make it easy and connect to them? So I think, good outcome. I don't know if we need to put a resolution forward. It's probably not related exactly to this, but I think we'll definitely have an offline discussion. And thank you. Are there any other questions on this item? No, so I will, could I have a mover? Councillor Collins, someone to second? The Mayor Goff? The Mayor. And would anyone like to speak on this item? Mayor Goff.
Thanks. I just want to speak briefly on it. Look, in a whole lot of ways, it'd be a lot more comfortable if we weren't a member of C40, because we'd have nobody looking over our shoulder, we'd have nobody stretching us, we'd have nobody applying discipline on us if we were falling short on what we said we were doing. But none of those are good reasons for not being a member of C40. I think it's a good thing that we have C40 there to stretch our determination and ability and willingness to reach out and achieve the targets. We have the targets set by them, but actually we've set the targets for ourselves, because our climate action plan is reflective of exactly what C40 is asking of us. And they will be looking at us to see if we're delivering on the program. But why would we have accepted and passed the climate action plan? Why would have we moved to declare a climate emergency if we weren't determined to do those things? So I think on one hand, C40 is really helpful to us because it provides that information, it provides that stimulation, it provides that discipline. And I think it's also great because then we can share with other cities that are like-minded cities. I think we've got something over 90 cities in C40. And, the best example I've got is that I turned up the one meeting that I've gone to internationally for it, in Paris. I turned up there and they said, why don't you join the top group in the C40, which will sign up to a fossil fuels-free street declaration? And I thought, shit, can I do that? And I rang back and checked with officers and AT and the rest, and we could, and we were part of that leadership group. And now we've gone beyond that, and we're not going to wait till 2025. We're going to do it this year. So I think there's real benefits. To pick up John and Angela's points, when it talks about leadership, they're not talking about the mayor. They're talking about the city. And every one of us actually needs to be out there leading the way you know, and I think we should take inspiration from Rod Carr's address this morning. I certainly felt inspired by it. It gave me confidence that this was something that was achievable, affordable, and he had really good answers to the questions. I thought he gave the best exposition that I've seen. So, you know, agree entirely with Angela and John that that's what should happen. In terms of the attendance internationally, the only time in my life I think that I've ever been approached by a journalist wanting to criticise me for not attending meetings overseas and taking international trips. And the truth is, I can't always do that, and I've got other priorities. I have got to one. It is not a cost to the city because C40 pay for an officer and a representative. And the last meeting, I think, was in Mexico. Would love to have gone to it. It was right on the election date, and we sent Penny Hulse, who was a fantastic representative for us there. So I won't always be able to be there. This year it'll all be done by Zoom, so I'm delegating the responsibility to Pippa and to Richard to attend these international meetings. But it could well be that others get the chance to attend, and we should participate, because when we look for examples, we don't look at other cities comparable to us in New Zealand, because there are none. We look at other cities around the world of a similar size, scale, and wanting to exercise that leadership. So what is set out here is challenging for us, but it's also doable. And I think that we'll really benefit from having that extra motivation and discipline for us to achieve the goals that we've adopted for ourselves. So I strongly support the recommendations in front of us.
Thank you, Mayor Goff. Any other speakers? Councillor Filipaina.
Just to flow on from His Worship the Mayor, I also hope that some of the councillors around this particular table actually go to a C40. As you know, the Zero Waste award that we received, and Parul and I were in Chicago. Can I tell you that flight...
For 24 hours, wasn't it?
that flight was a bit rough, and it was very cold there. But I would suggest that if you have the opportunity to go overseas, do that. Thank you, Your Worship.
But take a bit longer than Alf. He literally hopped on a plane, went over there, did the work, middle of winter, cold, miserable, and then flew back as soon as he'd done it. And anybody that says that that's a junket needs to look more closely at it. So thank you, Alf, formally in front of everybody for taking on that responsibility.
Are there any other speakers? Well, I'll just say briefly once again, I didn't see this item as controversial at all until a couple of media called me and said, "Oh, are you worried about this getting over the line?" And I sort of blinked. You know, why would we? We have, as a council, supported Te Tarakia Tawhiri. We've supported halving our emissions by 2030. We've supported a climate emergency, and we are doing the work. We're putting more initiatives into the 10-year budget, and I think all of us. I have not seen any wavering from any of you on this issue. So I didn't have any concerns that we would suddenly pull out now. But what this does do, the new leadership standards, it brings it up to another level. We've, you know, one of the parts is we've adopted a plan. Well, we've done that. Yay, tick that off. But the rest, you know, this C40 was set up as a, you know, engagement, as a progress, as a platform for cities to engage. And as Dr. Carr said earlier, these 97 cities are much like the 100 small countries. These 97 cities are a third of the world's emissions, and we are part of that. So it may seem insignificant working on our own, but those 97 cities together could, you know, make a massive, and are making a massive impact on the world's emissions. So I am excited that, as Alex said earlier, that people are looking to our plan for the Indigenous knowledge that is through it, and how we as a city have done that in partnership with Mana Whenua. That's quite exciting. We will take other ideas and other initiatives that we haven't thought of yet from other cities. So I think it's clear that we all need to act. I think the questions I'm getting from media and the public are, what are we doing about it? And there are lots of things we are doing about it, but we are going to have to do a hell of a lot more, because when we do get to 2024 and we are asked for that number 2 point around we're on track, we're going to have to prove we're on track or trying our best to be on track. And we know that from Te Tarakia Tawhiri, it's Auckland's plan, it is not Auckland Council's plan. We are going to need to put the pressure on, whether it's kindly or or whatever other means to get everyone else on board. And we know that with the Climate Commission's advice to government, that they are going to have to step up and they are going to have to help us. Because as Dr. Carr said, Auckland matters a lot and they can't do it without us. So we are going to need their help. And I think the last comment from Dr. Carr that stuck with me was, we can do as little as we can get away with, or as much as our grandchildren expect us to do. And I think that was, I don't know if I have grandchildren, hopefully I do, but I know there's a lot of other kids in my whānau and my friend life that will have grandchildren, and we need to do this and be committed constantly to this issue. And yeah, thank you for your support, and I hope you all support us staying in C40 because it's extremely important to our city. Thank you. All those in favour? Aye. Those opposed? Perfection. Could I say that's carried unanimously? Yes. Cool. Thank you very much. Thank you, Alec. Thank you, Jacques. Right. On to item 11.